The Book of Exodus, fully summarized. So, despite there only being 70 Israelites who originally came to Egypt, their population exploded over 1 million in just 400 years. Wow, I thought Mormons had a lot of kids. These Jews are thirsty. They became powerful, so the new Pharaoh, who never knew of Joseph and how he was a hero of Egypt, feared them, and thought they might betray him, so he greatly increased their burdens, forcing them to build his cities. This did not stop their population from growing, though, as they were just pumping out babies left and right, so Pharaoh made a rule that every male child was to be killed, but female children would remain alive. However, the midwives of Israel decided that that rule was bunk, and disobeyed Pharaoh, which pleased God. It happened that a baby was born of the house of Levi, and the mother feared for him, so she hid him by the river, and a daughter of Pharaoh discovered him and kept him as her son. However, one day Moses witnessed an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, and he killed him in anger, and hid the body in fear of someone finding out. Moses was in fear of the Pharaoh who wanted to kill him for his crime, so he fled. And Pharaoh eventually died, and then he went to the land of Midian, and settled down there, and had a son named Gershom from his wife Zipporah, the daughter of the priest of Midian, Reuel. The Israelites were crying out to God because they were tired of being in bondage, since their situation hadn't really changed, even with the death of the previous Pharaoh. So God remembered, oh yeah, I have a covenant with these people. When Moses came to Horeb, the mountain of God, with the flock of his father-in-law Jethro, I thought his name was Reuel, whatever, he saw the Lord appearing in a burning but not burning bush. God told Moses of how he had come to deliver the Israelites out of Egypt to the Promised Land, a land flowing with milk and honey, and that Moses would confront Pharaoh and that God would be with him. He told Moses to tell the Israelites that the great God their forefathers, I Am, sent him. God told him to gather the elders of Israel and tell Pharaoh to let the Israelites out of Egypt temporarily for 3 days to sacrifice to God. But God knew that Pharaoh would refuse, and so his plan was to strike down the Egyptians with his mighty hand. And by the end, Israel would be walking out of Egypt with a boatload of loot. Moses asked what he should do if Pharaoh did not believe that he had God on his side, so God told him to perform 3 miraculous magic tricks as proof for Pharaoh, turning a rod into a serpent, turning his hand leprous, and turning water into wine. That's JC. Turning water into blood. Moses said that he was not a good speaker, and God got pissed at him, so he decided that Moses' brother would speak the words that were being given to Moses by God as his spokesperson. And God would soon send Aaron to meet him. So Aaron would be Moses' spokesperson, and Moses would be God's spokesperson. Seems like you could just cut out the middleman, if you ask me. God told Moses to firmly grasp his rod in his hand, and then Moses took his wife and sons to Egypt to carry out God's work. But then, for some reason, when he got to an inn, God tried to kill Moses, but never fear, his wife Zipporah cut off his son's dick tip and cast the foreskin on Moses' feet, and God was satisfied with that, I guess, and stopped trying to kill Moses. Weird detour. Aaron and the elders of Israel met and were notified that God was about to save them, and the people believed and bowed down to God for their salvation. Then Moses and the elders told Pharaoh to tell the Israelites to go for a 3-day journey into the desert to sacrifice, or else the Lord would rain hell down upon Egypt. But he didn't listen to them, and instead made the Israelites make their bricks without being given straw to increase their burdens, and they were not able to handle it, so the Israelites held disdain for Moses and Aaron because they had made their lives harder. So Moses questioned God about why he told him to confront the Pharaoh when it had disastrous consequences. However, God assured him that he would save the Israelites from their bondage with his divine power, as he had made a covenant with their ancestors. He then told Moses to reassure his people of this, but they didn't listen to him. The chapter then goes through another long, pointless genealogy going over the descendants of the 12 sons of Israel and the families of Moses and Aaron. Apparently Moses' mother was also his great-aunt. Hooray for incest! Then the Lord explained to Moses that he would intentionally make it so that Pharaoh would not let the Israelites go by hardening his heart, so that he could show off his power and make the Israelites fear him. So much for free will, I guess. Then Aaron used his miraculous rod in front of Pharaoh and turned it into a serpent to impress Pharaoh. But Pharaoh's sorcerers did the same thing. However, Aaron's serpent ate theirs, so this round goes to God, I guess. Then, with the power of God, Aaron used his miraculous rod, once again, to turn the rivers into blood. killing all the marine life and making the water in Egypt completely undrinkable, which probably caused mass death due to dehydration, but that's neither here nor there. But the magicians of Pharaoh did the same thing. Yes, they turned the water into blood after it was already turned into blood by Aaron somehow. Then Aaron used his miraculous rod a third time to cause frogs to appear all over Egypt. But the Pharaoh's magicians did the same thing once again. However, the Pharaoh was done with this crap and gave in and said that he would let the Israelites sacrifice to God if Aaron got rid of the frogs, which he did. And the dead frogs started stinking up the place. But then Pharaoh hardened his heart and continued to keep the Israelites, so Aaron struck the dust of the land, turning it into lice. But this time Pharaoh's magicians could not recreate it, which means God officially wins this magic show. So frogs and blood they could create, but not lice? Weird. Then God sent swarms of flies all over Egypt, except in the land of the Israelites. So Pharaoh again said that the Israelites could leave if the swarm was called off. So the Lord removed the flies at Moses' request. But then Pharaoh hardened his heart once more and would not let them leave. Dude, for real, you know more plagues are going to come if you go back on your word again. It doesn't matter if you lie to get them to stop the current plague. Stupid Pharaoh. Then the Lord sent severe pestilence that killed all of the livestock of Egypt, which they probably needed to survive, but none of the Israelite livestock was harmed. Then Moses scattered handfuls of ash upwards at God's command, which the Lord used to cause horrible boils and sores over everyone in Egypt. Pharaoh might have let them go after this, but God hardened Pharaoh's heart so he didn't, which gave God a great excuse to cause more death and destruction. Then Moses stretched out his hand, and God sent lethal flaming hail, which killed any unprotected person or animal in Egypt, even though all the animals should have already been killed by the pestilence plague, but the Israelites were all spared. So Pharaoh surrendered and promised to let Israel go if God stopped the hail, which he did, but Pharaoh hardened his heart again and didn't let them go. Okay, seriously, is it God hardening Pharaoh's heart or Pharaoh hardening his own heart? Make up your damn mind, Bible. Okay, so God told Moses it was actually him the whole time who was hardening Pharaoh's heart so that he could showcase his awesome power, and then Moses and Aaron confronted Pharaoh and said that God would bring a swarm of locusts over the entire territory that would eat literally everything if he didn't let them go. So no water and no food. These people are going to die. So Pharaoh begrudgingly allowed Israel to leave, but God still wanted to show off some more, so he sent the locust anyway. So Pharaoh begged them to just take away the locusts and that he would let them go if they did. So here's a question. Why didn't Pharaoh just kill Moses and Aaron so they couldn't bring the plagues anymore? I mean, seems like a simple solution. So God took away the locusts, but he hardened Pharaoh's heart again, and so Pharaoh was not able to let them go. So Moses stretched out his hand, and God sent a plague of total darkness for 3 days. 3 days! But the Israelites' crib was still well lit. Pharaoh was once again considering letting them go, but the Lord hardened his heart again, so he wouldn't let them go. So God was planning to bring one more plague on Egypt, the killing of all firstborn sons of Egyptians, slaves, and animals. Kind of unnecessary since everything should probably be dead now anyways, but whatever, and that would be sure to let Pharaoh let the Israelites go. So then Moses explained to the Israelites his instructions from God, and that they were all supposed to take an unblemished male lamb and kill it, and put the blood on the doorposts of their house, so when the Lord's spirits came to kill all the firstborns, he would see the blood and harm no one inside the house. Moses then told the Israelites what they needed to do to survive the 10th plague, and God went through with Moses all the incredibly complicated details for the celebration of Passover, which was to be an eternal feast commemorating the righteous murder of children by God. And God made sure to mention over and over and over again that no leaven was ever to be eaten, or whoever did would have their ass banished from Israelite society. Yes, God really does hate yeast that much. Then the Lord came back and struck down all the firstborns of Egypt to execute judgment upon their gods, including Pharaoh's son, and there wasn't a single household in Egypt where someone didn't die. And so the Pharaoh finally allowed Israel to leave with many riches and provisions as well, so Israel was finally free. And it only took the complete obliteration of Egyptian society to get it done. I mean, I guess God could have just taken control of the Pharaoh and forced him to let them go. But how would his bloodlust have been satisfied then? Then Moses told Israel that the feast of Passover would be celebrated forever in the Promised Land to commemorate the anniversary of when God brought them out of Israel, and made clear that no foreigner was ever to eat Passover with them. God then instructed Moses to tell the Israelites that all of their firstborns were consecrated to him, in return for him killing the firstborns in Egypt. However, they could avoid killing their firstborn children by swapping them out with an animal. Oh, how thoughtful! God sent the Israelites to the Red Sea through the wilderness so no one would have second thoughts and go back to Egypt, as he guided them as a cloud by day and fire by night. Then Israel camped in Pi-hahiroth by the sea at the Lord's command. But then the Lord hardens Pharaoh's heart again. Oh, come on, we're still on this, God? And caused him to chase after Israel, regretting that he had let them go, and taking 600 chariots with him, which somehow had horses to pull them, even though all the animals were killed in the plagues. He eventually caught up with the Israelites while they were camping by the sea, so Israel cried out and complained that they would have been better off slaves in Egypt than dead in the wilderness. But God fought for Israel and told Moses to lift up his hand over the sea, and the winds divided the water in two, so the Israelites were able to cut right through it. The Egyptians followed the Israelites through the waters, but then the Lord jammed all the Egyptian chariot wheels so they couldn't follow any further. After the Israelites were all safely across, God told Moses to raise up his hand, and he swept the sea back to its normal height, and every single Egyptian that followed Israel was drowned to death. And had they been alive, they would have known his name was the Lord when he laid his vengeance upon them. Then Moses gathered Israel together and sang a song about how great and powerful and murderous the Lord was, and how he utterly destroyed their enemy the Egyptians, and would make all the peoples of the earth fear their name, for he was a God of war. They sang of how God would lead them into the promised land and rule forever and ever. Then Miriam, the prophetess, sister of Aaron, gathered the other women and sang a short song about the triumph of the Lord. The Israelites complained after 3 days from departing from the Red Sea about not having any water because they were in the wilderness of Shur. So the Lord made the undrinkable water of Marah drinkable, and then made clear that as long as Israel obeyed him, he would never subject them to the horror that he unleashed upon the Egyptians, and would instead provide for them. Then in the wilderness of Sin, Israel complained again because they were hungry and there was no food. So the Lord said that he would make bread rain down from heaven, and Moses and Aaron told Israel to shut their trap because the Lord would provide. But if they kept complaining, they would be committing a grave offense against God. The Lord then sent quail to eat in the evening, and sent a fine dew on the ground in the morning for the Israelites to eat. Moses told them that the manna that came down from the dew residue was the bread that God had given them to eat. Moses kept getting annoyed, though, because the Israelites were not eating it how he wanted them to, with some leaving it out for the next morning to go rotten. During the Sabbath, some Israelites gathered manna during it, which God saw as a big no-no, so he told Moses to get the Israelites to straighten up. No working on the Sabbath. Moses said that an omer of manna bread was to be preserved so future generations would remember that Israel feasted on it for 40 years until they got to Canaan. So then Israel complained again because they had no water, and Moses was getting pretty scared that he was going to be stoned to death by his own people. So God instructed Moses to strike the rock at Horeb, and he did, and water came out of it. Then the Amalek people went up and fought with Israel in Rephidim, so Moses sent Joshua and his men to fight with Amalek. They fought, and Moses held up his hand with God's mighty rod upon the hill, overlooking the battle, and so, because he held up God's mighty rod, he had the power, and the Israelites were victorious. So God promised to one day destroy the Amalekites, and thus Moses built an altar in remembrance of the Lord's promise to perpetually be at war with them, because remember, the Lord is a God of war. Then Moses' father-in-law Jethro heard everything that the Lord had done to Egypt for Israel from Moses. But Jethro pointed out to Moses, after being reunited with him, that he was doing too much work for Israel, and whenever there was a problem, everyone came to him. He suggested that Moses set up a system of government where the less important problems would be handled by people lower down the totem pole who were loyal servants of God, and more important problems would be passed up to higher-ups, also loyal servants of God, and the most important matters would be handled by him. Moses ended up taking Jethro's advice, and he departed from him. Then, while Israel was camping at Mount Sinai, Moses was told by the Lord to say to Israel that they had to keep God's covenant because they were his people, and so the Israelites promised they would do so. Then the Lord later came down physically on Mount Sinai, but no one was allowed to come near or they would be executed, and the mountain was completely covered in fire and smoke, so no one could actually see proof of God's existence. I don't know, seems a little sus to me. With a booming voice, God proclaimed from the mountain in the morning, "I am Oz, the great and powerful." No, just kidding. God told Moses to make sure that the riffraff didn't come up to the mountain and peek behind the curtain. And he told Moses that the priests needed to be sanctified to even come near the smoke cloud. God then told Moses to come up to the mountain with Aaron alone. So then God revealed to Moses the 10 Commandments, which were, 1. Don't have any other gods before me. 2. Don't make any carved image of anything that exists, because I am a jealous God, and I don't like when people worship things that are not me. 3. Don't take my name in vain. 4. Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy, and do no work on it, because I rested on the 7th day, despite being omnipotent. 5. Honor your parents. 6. Don't murder. 7. Don't commit adultery. 8. Don't steal. 9. Don't bear false witness. And 10. Don't covet anything or anyone that belongs to your neighbor. The people greatly feared God's presence and needed Moses to interpret his words for them. Then God said that Israel was only to sacrifice to him on an altar of earth, with no false idols of gold or silver on it. Then God gave Moses his laws for Israel on how to correctly buy, sell, treat, and beat slaves, and how to sell one's own daughter into slavery if you ever find yourself in a pinch. Then gave his laws concerning violence, which were very eye for an eye, as premeditated murder was punishable by death, hitting or cursing one's parents was punishable by death, kidnapping was punishable by death, killing your servants was severely punished, though it's not specified, but it was likely punished by death, and any serious injury to one's servants would have the servants go free. But if they got up after a day or two after a beating, you were totally good to beat them some more afterwards. Also, if a man hurts a pregnant woman and the resulting baby dies, then the husband has the right to demand a payment determined by the judges. But if the woman dies, then the one who injured her would die too. Hey guys, this means we finally get an answer from God himself as to whether an unborn baby's life matters more than the mother's life. Surprisingly, it actually doesn't, and the mother takes priority. Then God gave laws concerning animal control, which were that if an ox kills a person, then the ox will be stoned and not eaten, and if the owner did not keep it confined, then the owner would be stoned as well, or pay to redeem his life. And if the ox killed a servant, then the owner must pay the master 30 shekels. Then God gives some more laws on how a situation should be handled if an ox dies due to another's actions, and how a man must repay the owner. And then God gave out laws for the retribution for stealing and damaging a property. And God seemed to want people to oftentimes restore several-fold for what they stole. But in almost all cases, the people at fault had to pay restitution, but were not killed. And whenever a person claimed something of his was stolen, he had to come before a judge to decide the case. Then God gave his moral and ceremonial principles, and proclaimed that people could buy virgins from their fathers for a certain price, and that things like sorcery, bestiality, and sacrificing to other gods were crimes punishable by death. Then God proclaimed that his people must not oppress strangers and must not afflict the helpless, or God would personally kill them. Charging interest to one's fellow man is forbidden. Cursing God or any ruler is not allowed. One must pay their tithes and offer up their firstborn to God, and eating carcasses is forbidden. Then God gave his laws about being truthful, honest, impartial, and generous, and then God told the Israelites they were supposed to stop all work every 7th day and every 7th year. And he told them of 3 annual feasts that they were supposed to keep to God, including the Feast of Unleavened Bread, where they were to feast on unleavened bread, no yeast, and the Feast of the Harvest and the Feast of the Ingathering. And in all these feasts, all the males were to appear before the Lord, and sacrifices were to be offered. But baby lambs were never to be boiled in their mother's milk. What an oddly specific command. Was that a common thing to do? Then God promised to send an angel before the Israelites to destroy all their enemies and their false gods, and to make them successful and prosperous in the land where there would be no sickness or barrenness or miscarriages, the promised land, so long as they remained faithful to God, of course. In fact, God was planning on using murder hornets to drive the Hivites, Canaanites, and Hittites from the land. Cool. However, the foreign people were not to be driven out all at once so that the land wasn't completely filled with their animals after they were killed. God promised to set the boundaries of the Israelite territory and drive out all the nations before them, so that they wouldn't have to mingle with the false religions of the world. So then Moses built an altar and had oxen sacrificed to the Lord. He then confirmed God's covenant with his people by sprinkling the blood of the sacrifice on them. And then Moses, Aaron, and the 70 elders of Israel went up to see God and got a peek at his feet on the mountain. Ooh, God feet. Must be hot. God commanded Moses to come up and receive the tablet commandments, so Moses went up, leaving Aaron and Hur with the elders. And he waited while a cloud covered the mountain for 6 days. On the 7th, Moses went up into the all-consuming fire of the Lord and stayed on the mountain for 40 whole days with his assistant Joshua, waiting for his tablets. What the heck was God doing all that time anyway? Then the Lord finally spoke to Moses and demanded that all of Israel had to give up a ridiculous volume and variety of offerings, including a lot of valuable materials, and demanded that the Israelites create a tabernacle for him. The next 7 chapters of the Bible are basically just building instructions. Christ, Noah waited for 40 days for this crap? Anyway, it takes an entire chapter to list the directions for building the ark, the table, and the lampstand, and the candlesticks with all the measurements and accessories, and a lot of gold is used. Then the next entire chapter is dedicated to the directions for building the tabernacle with all of its measurements, the materials, and accessories given, and a lot of gold was used. Then the next entire chapter is dedicated to the directions for building the burnt offering altar and the court of the tabernacle with all its measurements and materials, and what oil to use to continually keep the lampstand lit, and a lot of bronze and brass is used. Then God states that Aaron and his sons and their descendants would minister to God forever, and they would wear fancy clothes that would be crafted by artisans filled with the Holy Spirit. And then the book spends an entire chapter listing the directions for creating the garments of Aaron and the priests, including the ephod, the breastplate, and some other parts of the priest's getup, including the robe, the bells, the turban, the cord, the sash, the tunic, the glory hats, and the trousers. And they were super fancy and excessive and used a lot of gold and other precious materials. It is also stated that if Aaron and his sons did not wear a golden bell and a pomegranate and holy trousers, then they would die when they went to minister in the holy place. Then God went on for another entire chapter about the complex directions for getting Aaron and his sons consecrated as priests, and it involved sprinkling blood from a bull over the altar, and sacrificing the bull's entrails, liver, and kidneys on the altar, and then killing a ram, and then sacrificing it to the Lord for a sweet, sweet aroma, and then killing another ram and sprinkling its blood on the parts of the bodies of Aaron and his sons, as well as the altar, and another burnt offering from a ram was supposed to be given to the Lord, and then another offering of carbs without yeast, and then another offering of ram breast. Aaron and his sons were to be anointed in their holy garments and consecrated as priests, and then boiled lamb flesh was to be eaten, but not in its mother's milk. Remember, God then states how a bull must be offered up every day to atone for the sins of Israel, and that anything touching the holy altar had to be holy, and then God details how to correctly make daily offering sacrifices and what types of sacrifice there were. 1 lamb in the morning and 1 in the evening every dang day keeps God away from killing everyone, a practice that was supposed to continue forever. Then God says he will continue dwelling amongst Israel because he was the God who brought them out of Egypt. Then God spends an entire chapter giving the directions for building the altar of incense, and a lot of gold was used, and it was also stated how incense was to be offered up. God also commanded that Moses was to take a census of Israel to check for any diseases, and to collect 1/2 shekel from every person, rich or poor, because we do in flat taxes in the ancient Middle East, for the service of the tabernacle to the Lord. God then gave directions for building a bronze laver for washing before going near the altar or the tabernacle, which the priests had to do or they would die. And then the Lord gave specific directions for creating holy oil, which was only meant to be poured on holy things, and anyone recreating it or using it for themselves would be cut off from Israel. And then the instructions for making perfume, and it was not to be made by anyone else, and anyone who used it for themselves would be cut off from Israel. Then God told Moses that he filled Bezalel, the son of Uri, with the wisdom of God, as well as all the gifted artisans of the land, so that they would be able to create all the things that he gave them instructions for. God then told Moses that the Sabbath was holy and was to be kept forever, and anyone profaning it or working on it would be put to death. Then God gave Moses the 2 stone tablets of his law, but Israel was getting bored since Moses wasn't coming down. I mean, it's been nearly 50 days, so I can't really blame them. So then they asked Aaron to make them a new god to worship, and for some reason Aaron agreed, despite the fact that he had been Moses' literal spokesperson for God before, and he used all the gold that they had to create a golden calf for them to worship, telling them that the golden calf was what really brought them out of Egypt. I guess God's awesome and bloody display of power against the Egyptians was kind of pointless, since the Egyptians have such a bad memory. They start worshipping other gods if they are kept waiting for a while. So Israel worshipped it with an altar and everything, but the Lord saw what they were doing and was absolutely livid, and was about to go and kill them all, and do a reset with Moses as his new chosen one. But Moses talked him out of it by reminding him of the covenant he made with their forefathers, and that it might be a bad look if he brought his chosen people out of Egypt just to have them killed. So the unchanging Lord changed his mind and did not kill them. But when Moses came down from the mountain, he became very angry with Israel because of the calf god, and broke the stone tablets on the ground. Jeez, God worked hard on those. And destroyed the golden calf, and made the people of Israel drink its remains. Ew, gross. Then he yelled at Aaron for not stopping them, but didn't punish him for some reason. Then Moses gathered the sons of Levi, loyal followers of the Lord, or else how would they have such gangsta titan-slaying powers, and told them to kill 3,000 sinful Israelites who had worshipped the calf god, which they did. And then Moses went back up to the mountain to beg for God's forgiveness on behalf of the Israelites. You just killed a bunch of them. You're talking about forgiveness? But God still promised to send punishment for Israel's sins, and so the Lord plagued the Israelites, probably killing more of them, I guess. Then the Lord told Moses to have his people depart to the promised land, and he would send his angel to destroy the nations in front of them. But he would not go with them, because he might be tempted to kill them for their wickedness. So Moses went to the tabernacle of meeting, where God's cloudy pillar had descended at, and he spoke with God face to face. Moses tried to convince God to stay with Israel, saying that they would surely perish without him, and so God was won over by the grace of Moses, and agreed to stay with his people. But God also said that no man would see him and live. Wait, what? Wait a minute, it just said earlier in the chapter that Moses saw God face to face, and earlier in Exodus, multiple characters saw God's feet or whatever, and tons of characters have seen God before, including Jacob, who literally got into a wrestling match with God. And now you're telling me that no one sees God and lives. What? Anyway, then God told Moses about a new place to come to him upon a rock, and Moses would only see his sexy back from now on. So then God told Moses to come back up the mountain and bring new stone tablets for him to carve the 10 Commandments into them again. So Moses did so and went back up to Sinai. And Moses begged God to stay with Israel despite his transgressions. So God made a covenant with them and promised to make them see the works of the Lord and defeat all their enemies before him, as long as they worshipped no other gods, because the Lord God was a jelly God. The Israelites were to utterly destroy the nations before them and their altars and their images, so that they would not be tempted to follow other gods. Freedom of religion? What's that? All I see is theocracy here. As long as they, 1. Worshipped only the one true God, 2. Didn't forge any idols to worship, 3. Kept his feast of bread without leaven, no yeast, 4. Dedicated all their firstborn males to him, 5. Rested on the 7th day, 6. Celebrated the Feast of the Weeks, and the Feast of the Ingathering, 7. Had all the men appear before the Lord 3 times a year, 8. Didn't use any freaking yeast in sacrifices because yeast is evil, 9. Gave God all the fruits of the land, and 10. Didn't boil a baby goat in its mother's milk. Then if they kept all these, they would be on God's good side. After 40 more days up on the mountain without food or water, because apparently God created the universe in 6 days but struggles from crippling writer's block, Moses wrote these new commandments on the tablets, despite God saying that he would be writing down everything that was on the original set instead of these new commandments, which means that all the Christians have been getting it wrong the whole time. The true 10 Commandments kept in the Ark of the Covenant were the ones about not using any yeast and not boiling baby goats in their mother's milk. You hear that, you evil bakers? It's hell for you! Then Moses climbed back down, and his face was shining to the Israelites, so he wore a veil so that they would not totally freak out. And Moses regularly asked God's advice on things after that. And then Moses gathered all the people together and told them to obey the Sabbath or die, and to give really expensive and expansive offerings to God, to create the stuff that God gave instructions for beforehand, to be made by the skilled artisans. So then everyone came up and freely gave offerings to God in the tabernacle. Artisans to build the tabernacle were chosen and filled with God's wisdom for the task, which was proclaimed by Moses to the people. Moses then called all the artisans that the Lord had imbued with wisdom to start up the construction, and he commanded the people to stop bringing offerings for the creation of the tabernacle because there was already more than enough materials. Gee, you think? The Israelites apparently had valuable materials coming out of the wazoo. And then it takes the entire rest of the chapter to state the process of the craftsmen constructing the tabernacle, and a lot of gold was used. An entire chapter is then dedicated to the step-by-step process of the craftsmen creating the ark, and the table, and the lampstand, and the altar, and the candlesticks, and the oil and incense, and a lot of gold was used. Then an entire chapter is dedicated to the step-by-step directions for building the burnt offering altar, the bronze laver, and the court of the tabernacle, and listing all of the materials that Bezalel and Aholiab used to make everything, including a lot of gold, silver, and brass. Then an entire chapter is dedicated to listing the step-by-step process of the craftsmen creating the holy garments of the priesthood, including the ephod and the breastplate, where a lot of Steven Universe characters were used, and the other priestly garments for Aaron and his sons, including the robe, the bells, the tunics, the turban, and the fancy hats. So that's where the popes got the idea from. The cord, the sash, and a lot of valuable material was used, including gold. Thus, all the work was finally completed, and all the things were brought to Moses to see. Moses blessed the children of Israel for their help in creating the tabernacle and all its accessories, as well as the holy garments. Then the final chapter is dedicated to explaining in meticulous detail how the tabernacle of the Lord should be set up and arranged and ministered to, and Moses carried out his instructions faithfully. Then Aaron and his sons were anointed and consecrated as priests for eternity, as per God's instructions. And whenever they entered into the tabernacle, they would always wash themselves with the laver, as God commanded. And so the tabernacle was set up. God continually resided above the tabernacle as a cloud and signaled when the Israelites were supposed to travel. And so the Israelites continued on their 40-year journey to reach a place that would have taken at most a few weeks to travel to, even in their time. The end.